the Toward a New World podcast with your host, Corinna Stoffel. As a space for all things regarding the global collective transition we are in, we have conversations about transition, separation, and connection regarding oneself, others, and the earth. The aim is to educate, empower, and inspire. Hello and welcome. Here we are again, another Thursday. And today's theme is us versus them. I've been sitting with that theme for a while. And I need to do that because I want to get clear on where am I truly coming from when I'm talking about this. And so that doesn't happen overnight. And you may gather why this doesn't happen overnight as you listen to this podcast. The us versus them is a mentality that I have seen increase drastically over the last 8 to 10 years. And it has been increasing in a lesser form, probably over another 5 to 10 years before that. I see it in personal relationships. I see it in social settings, political settings. I see it between countries. And it leads to fighting on a verbal level or even on a physical level. Physical level, not just, fighting with somebody else, but all the way up to wars and truly inflicting damage from a lot of different perspectives. Now, what's the basis for this us versus them? It is a black and white thinking that is based on judgment. The judgment is we are good, they are bad, possibly even evil, maximum bad. We are right, they are wrong. The irony is that either side is thinking that way. So it really doesn't get us anywhere. And what I am noticing, it is also easier to come from polarity, from black and white thinking, than looking at all kinds of different perspectives, what I call the shades of gray in between the black and the white. But that means you need to educate yourself, you need to differentiate, being nuanced, and all of that. As I see it, we all have become somewhat lazy. It's much easier to go to black or white, right or wrong, And in a way, if I go to news nowadays, it's actually modeled by the media. And if I think back to the news, let's say in the 80s, I didn't live in the US in the 70s, so I don't want to go there. But it was much more nuanced. Nowadays, it's all good or all bad. And I recently had to laugh because there was a news article where it was stating that eventually the earth will no longer support human life, and that future date was millions of years in the future. And I said, that's the problem we're having? What about now? You know? So for me, I don't listen much to the news because I can't go into this black and white. That just does not work for me. And the main reason is the other is another human being. And I may not agree with where they're coming from. I may not agree with their opinion, their point of view, but I at least have respect for them as being another human being. And I am interested in understanding, why are you thinking the way you're thinking? Why are you looking at the world the way you're looking at the world? What is the belief system that's the lens through which you look? And, you know, I lean in one direction, and I'm perfectly willing to get the news that is diametrically opposed to that, because I'm curious. Why are they seeing that way? And I have to admit that in some situations, I have to actually agree with them and said, you know what? You got a point there. And it is not all black and white for me. For me, there is my personal truth, but there is no capital T truth, which so many people believe that there is. If we just get the right truth, then we know where we are at. Look at nature. Does nature have a singular truth? I can't find it there. And going back a little bit to what I said is respect for the other person, the other being, as being human. It is that black and white thinking actually dehumanizes the other, which then makes it a lot easier to fight them, to kill them, be it physically, be it emotionally, socially, in whichever way. Um, and it's not the reality. Are we willing to look at both sides and at the shades of gray in between? Now, often I can understand why a person is looking at the world that way or thinking that way. That understanding will not condone, though, if there is violence associated with it, because violence is not necessary. And I find it so interesting that, in a way, it's almost like humans being violent is considered normal. Yet I recently listened to an interview where, how shall I say that best, where it stated that normally we believe civilization has started about 5,000 years ago. And during that time, the excavations have found that there has been fighting, be it through weapons, being through the structure of the the cities or villages that have been excavated. But there is also excavations that go way further back, 13,000 years back. And interestingly, they don't find weaponry. They don't find fortified cities. So it makes me wonder, is it truly normal for human beings that we are violent, that we have to fight, that we are in that sense competitive? I need to have what you have. You cannot have more than I have, you know? And is that normal? Or are we normalizing it to not feel bad, guilty, shameful about our way of acting? I don't know. I'm leaving it as a question for you to consider. I know where I am at, and that's it. Uh, Fighting something, to get back to fighting something. Have you ever noticed that if you fight against something, there's almost a guarantee that the clashing and the fighting continues? Because when I fight against something, the other side feels the need to defend, which in turn means fighting me. So we actually get into an endless cycle of violence. You know, as the saying goes, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And really being with that, I was digging even deeper. Yes, there is polarity, there is this black and white thinking, we've become lazy. But is there anything underneath that? And what came for me is looking at the fact of communication. What if the fighting is a sign of a total breakdown in communication? We can no longer communicate with each other, and we can no longer sit at the same table and talk about the issues. And that, in a way, I don't want to go into that today. I want to make that its own subject. And I will follow up next week on this podcast with a podcast about communication, looking at communication and how it is nowadays and how it could be. So I'm leaving you with that. And I'm leaving you with a notice that since it really doesn't work for me to have this fighting, this polarity, I started this week in my Facebook group to do a coherence meditation where we extend care, appreciation, compassion, and gratitude to the other. And I want to see what happens. I remember having been part of something like that. And I don't remember exactly when that was, but I'm curious because we are affected by the world and how the earth and the vibration? And am I allowing the vibration of war, of hate, of violence to be the dominant one? Or am I setting a counterpoint to that by having compassion, by coming from caring? Check it out. My Facebook group's name is Helper Society, and anybody is welcome to join. I'll see you next week.